Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for this new edition of Business Africa. On our show today we talk about money in all its forms, from Zimbabwe's new currency to business financing, including credit risk rating, and we take stock with Adama Aristide Ouattara from Deloitte on the African Financial Industry Barometer. But first, let's get on with the show with our top stories today. An African credit risk rating agency is to be introduced soon. After several years of effort, the African Union is getting closer to the goal.
The issues that African countries have with the measure, the three big credit rating agencies. First is their methodology, that they, in their methodology, some of them do their reports remotely, and there's no consistency and transparency.
Processing, producing and ensuring food self-sufficiency for its fellow citizens, this is the dream come true of Okapi agro-business in eastern DRC.
That's how we started with processing, but we support them through agricultural cooperatives. We escort farmers and breeders because they provide us with the raw materials.
Reducing unemployment and improving Nigeria's electricity supply is possible thanks to the White Consult initiative, which trains people to install solar panels.
The White Consult Training Institute is focused into training young technical hands in the renewable energy sector. We've been able to churn out 50 students in the last 3 years.
And we open this edition with a criticism that often comes up in African financial circles. The major international credit risk rating agencies tend to release harsh ratings that give the continent a negative economic outlook. Over the last few years, the African Union has been working to create an alternative rating system more sensitive to local economic realities. Let's head to Lusaka in Zambia, where the latest discussions were held on the future African Rating Agency. This is a report by Wandiswa Tangento.
The African Union is gearing up to launch Africa's first credit ratings agency in 2025. African governments are seeking sovereign credit ratings in order to access global capital markets and attract foreign direct investments. The AU's African Peer Review Mechanism says one of the prime indicators for success of the Africa Credit Rating Agency lies in reducing the country risk premium.
The issues that African countries have with the measure, the three big credit rating agencies. First is their methodology, that they, in their methodology, some of them do their reports remotely, and there's no consistency and transparency. They supposed to use the same indicators, but they then rate the different countries differently. You know, you'll expect consistency if you are using tools, and country A and country B have similarities. They are supposed to rate more or less, but it doesn't happen with them, because in the case of African countries, they put a risk premium. Just your geographic location makes your country very risky.
The agency will be self-funded, with the ownership structure composing of the African multilateral finance institutions, domestic rating agencies, and international investors. The AU says they are working on getting buy-in from the private sector.
You need to convince the African market players and governments that they indeed can make use of the Africa Credit Rating Agency. Instead of saying, I'd rather continue relying on the big three. That is buy-in. And they see a huge opportunity in making use of that. So we have to do a lot of work. There's the African Union and the African Peer Review Mechanism to communicate the projects to governments and the private sector so that there's buy-in.
One economist says the Africa Credit Ratings Agency should draw inspiration from China, which has over 50 credit rating agencies.
What we've seen in China, for example, is that those domestic credit rating agencies started off around the mid-1980s, and they've grown and actually in some circumstances, and over time, some of them have even been bought up, or shares from the big three agencies have even been taken up into those domestic rating agencies. And what's been interesting about them is that, about the Chinese credit rating agencies, there's over 50 now, is that they have their own methodologies as well. They have some differences with what happens in terms of the outcomes domestically versus what the international ratings do. But, for example, many of them rate our economies, our African economies, as much as the big three credit rating agencies do. So what China is an example of showing how credit rating agencies can grow, and also how you can really create an environment for credit rating domestically localized credit rating agencies to flourish.
The agency seeks to tap into the 22 African countries that have no credit ratings from Moody's, Fitch and S&P. One of Africa's new players, Sovereign Africa Ratings, says the establishment of the agency will be important not only for investors, but ordinary citizens.
An ordinary person should care because they depend on leadership to figure out what the problems are in society so that they have a better income, so that their children have better education and better health care. With Africa's economy being where it is now, it's not performing too well. And one of the reasons why it's not performing too well is because the global financial system does not favor Africa because of Africa's history. And a credit rating agency in Africa would help Africa to begin to realize its full potential, because it will get access to credit at a lower rate. It will also be able to have more stable currencies, and those would mean that it will be able to get more for its exports and generally improve the standard of living. So we are talking about multiples or factors of 2, factors of 3. So an ordinary person with a low income can in fact end up with a much better standard of living over the next 5 to 10 years, because the engine room that drives and diagnoses the economy has been fixed, and Accra is there to enable that.
The main driving force for establishing the Africa Credit Rating Agency is that low ratings has resulted in countries having difficulties in accessing global markets or incurring huge borrowing costs on international financial markets. Consequently, these challenges impede ambitions for industrialization, infrastructure development, and building economic resilience. Wandi Swandengendo, Lusaka, Zambia.
And meanwhile, in Zimbabwe, banks have scrambled to convert all Zimbabwe dollar account balances to ZiG. ZiG is the new national tender launched 1 week ago and backed by a basket of foreign currency and gold. It replaced the local dollar with a hope to end a serial slide which caused a massive inflation in the country. The ZiG banknotes and coins will start circulating in the economy by the end of this month. In Senegal, the administration of new President Bassirou Diomaye Faye is seen as strengthening control over the economy and the energy sector. The president has confirmed an audit of the mining, oil and gas sectors and intends to disclose the effective ownership of extractive companies. Former tax inspectors have been promoted to positions in the new government. A new economy minister, Abdourahmane Sarr, a monetary policy specialist from the IMF and former candidate in the presidential election. This comes as Senegal is preparing to open the taps this year on the $4.8 billion Grand Tortue Ameim liquefied natural gas project. Food self-sufficiency as a prerequisite for economic development and even the return of peace. Bernard Bahati, a Congolese entrepreneur in the east of the DRC, is convinced of this. In his province of North Kivu, now ravaged by the war between the Congolese armed forces and the M23 rebels, the agricultural sector is badly affected. This is why Bernard Bahati has decided to contribute to tackle food insecurity of the region with his maize processing factory, which employs 50 people and which he funded himself, the Okapi agro business, a valuable support for farmers and breeders. Take a look. The OKP agribusiness flour mill is located in the Bujovo district in Goma, a few meters from the border between Rwanda and the DRC. Maize from different territories in North Kivu, South Kivu, Tanganyika and other regions of the DRC is stored here before being processed. OKP Agribusiness is a 100% Congolese agri-food processing plant with a production capacity of more than 50 tons of flour daily.
We noticed that we were only mentioned in bad times because when you type Congolese youth on the internet or the east of the DRC, the images were only about war, conflict, rape. We thought, why can't we give a good image of our country? Of course, there are young people who are in armed groups, but not all young people. There are also young entrepreneurs like us who do good for the nation and other citizens' well-being.
Bernard Bahati, this 37-year-old Congolese entrepreneur, has kept the city of Goma afloat in the face of the hurricane that has shaken it for several months, particularly due to the war between the armed forces of the DRC and the M23 rebels. More than 87% of the population of Goma consumes maize flour. Unfortunately, the territory of Rutshuru, the largest producer of maize in the province, is at war. Relations between neighboring countries, including Rwanda and Uganda, must be improved for the population to get supplies. Fortunately, the OKP factory still had maize in stock, so the town is always supplied.
We wanted to create an ecosystem to impact every economic strata of the province or the country. That's how we started with processing, but we support them through agricultural cooperatives. We escort farmers and breeders because they provide us with the raw materials. We teach them how to produce in quality and quantity. Maize is produced here in North Kivu and sent abroad to be processed and returned to us as flour. Why can't we process this maize here at home and sell it at an affordable price to the population? So we decided to start with something.
The incidence of poverty in the DRC averages 80%, and the unemployment rate is 84%. But what is notable is that this company employs more than 50 young Congolese. Its agricultural and veterinary engineers train farmers and breeders in the methods to be used for better production. Some farmers in the region, such as Elia Muchindi, who have benefited from the support of OKP's team, are producing both in quality and quantity.
I harvest bags of soya and maize, which I take to the factory to earn a living and ensure my family's survival. I take advantage of the sombe and also the cassava flour that my wife sells on the road. We eat and live very well here as far as food is concerned, but we are afraid of the war because many people have fled this village. I wish the war would end immediately so we can continue cultivating and enjoying our fields. If the war ends, we can return to our old life.
According to Bernard Bahati, the overall project, including packaging, preservation and trade towards other cities in the country, is valued at $7 million. An example of entrepreneurial courage and a demonstration that food security could soon be within reach in eastern Congo. Welcome back to the second part of our show. The leaders of the African financial industry are overwhelmingly optimistic about the 3-year economic outlook. This is what emerged from the recent barometer of the African financial industry presented by AFIS, the Africa Financial Industry Summit, and Deloitte. How can we analyze this optimism? We interviewed Aristide Ouattara in Paris. He is the head of the West African financial industry at Deloitte. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Aristide Ouattara, hello. Political instability, security risk and cybercrime worry leaders of the African financial industry. And yet, they remain very optimistic. How do you explain this result?
The optimism is real, and it comes from the fact that managers are confident about the degree of resilience of these banks. Despite this risk, they believe they have the capacity to go beyond. So, these financial institutions have demonstrated their resilience in recent crises, and in addition, its leaders, in any case, are much more attentive to opportunities. In other words, more focused by the opportunities than the risk behind them.
The report says that the management of these risks that you mentioned, in particular the risk of cybercrime, is sometimes done to the detriment of financing the real economy. What did you notice concretely?
The barometer highlights good financial performance of these financial institutions despite all this economic context and all these emerging risks. It turns out that these institutions have put a number of measures in place, classic mitigation management measures, of course. This is the term used for these risks, and it will at some point lead them to do what we call the rationalization of their service offering. Therefore, they will select clients based on their risk level, on their ability to absorb this risk as well. And all this is imposed in particular by prudential standards, whether in the banking industry or in the insurance level, which means that this institution must limit their financing capacity to match their own funds and therefore maintain a level of profitability legally required by investors but also by regulators.
Exigé par les investisseurs, mais aussi par les régulateurs.
At some point, a trade-off must be made between the volume of financing and compliance with these different standards and profitability requirements. So we face a rationalization of the offer, which unfortunately can have an impact on the financing of the real economy.
What about the departure of major international banking groups? Is this an opportunity for the African financial industry?
There
is clearly an opportunity today for these groups with a Pan-African vocation, which must strengthen their capacity, their striking force. So it is very interesting for these groups, whether they are banking or insurance groups, to expand by acquiring all subsidiaries which are in the process of being left aside by international groups.
Libérés par des groupes internationaux. Donc aujourd'hui, on voit effectivement.
So today, we are actually seeing major players like Vista Bank, like Coris, and other groups to effectively take the place of these international institutions. And what's more, it's a great opportunity because when they leave, their subsidiaries, which indeed have high-level standards, which will trigger a sort of leveling up. So this is clearly an opportunity. It will allow us to have real Pan-African champions.
Pan-Africain.
There's an obstacle, the whole Pan-African prudential harmonization part, which is very important for this industry. Where are we and what remains to be done?
So this topic is extremely important for the African financial industry. This is a fundamental theme since today we have 41 central banks, which means 41 regulations, regulatory frameworks, and so on. When we are a Pan-African banking group, for example, we have the vocation to be present everywhere in Africa. We would have to manage 41 regulations, and that is something which is impossible if we want to optimize the allocation of resources, capital, and liquidity. So we really need a certain convergence, and therefore why we are trying. When I say we, it is in any case the leaders of the financial industry. They were very unanimous on the fact that we must create a unified framework. So why the African Banking Authority or an African Banking Union? Because these are institutions that have existed almost everywhere in the world, and that can be duplicated in Africa. You should know that the idea of creating the African Central Bank, which will also be part of the necessary pillars before moving towards this banking union, is an idea that has been put on the table in 2013 in Nigeria by the African Union and which is still being implemented. But there are some delays, so we must reactivate these initiatives, which will require collaboration at all levels, at the level of governments, at the level of the industry, and at the level of all stakeholders, so that we truly have a regulatory framework which is convergent, not unique, but convergent, which can allow the emergence of pan-African financial institutions.
L'éclosion justement d'institutions financières panafricaines.
Aristide Ouattara, thank you very much.
Je vous remercie.
However, private financing does not quite follow the optimism that can be reflected in the barometers of the perspectives of the business world. The amount that African private companies in Africa managed to raise last year fell by 9% to $1.9 billion in 2023. Volatile macroeconomic conditions explain this development, with venture capital the most affected. It fell by 23%. Africa's startups have suffered. 20 closed down, laying off their workforce, mostly in the 4 key countries of this ecosystem: Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa. Ethiopia is still struggling to agree with the IMF on a loan that would pave the way for the restructuring of its sovereign debt. But that doesn't stop the country from moving forward quickly with his stock market project. The new ESX exchange, created last year, was largely successful in reaching its goal of $11.7 million in initial capital needed to begin operations. The Nigerian Stock Exchange has acquired a 5% stake in the Ethiopian market. Unemployment and electricity shortage, 2 recurring ills in Nigeria. The country has just announced very unpopular electricity price increases, which will affect individuals. It is in this context that a training program for young Nigerians in technical skills for installing solar panels is operating. Does this initiative mean more energy and more jobs? Our journalist Hugo Yuana wanted to know more. Take a look.
Adebola Anofi, a young Nigerian entrepreneur in the renewable energy space, is empowering young unemployed Nigerians to alleviate the myriad of challenges the power sector faces in Nigeria through his organization, White Consult Training Institute.
I grew up in a neighborhood, an estate. Once it's 7 p.m., there's hardly power supply from the main grid. Generators set blaring everywhere. The environment is polluted. You can hardly breathe in good air. And all this became a cause of concern for me. I sat down one day and I began to look at it. Are there no possible eco-friendly ways which you can generate power without having a polluted environment?
Adebola's quest to alleviating the power challenges by providing eco-friendly solutions for alternative power supply in Nigeria led him to setting up White Consult Training Institute for young Nigerians to be equipped with the skill to be solution providers in the renewable energy space and also gainfully employed as solar power inverter technicians.
The White Consult Training Institute is focused into training young technical hands in the renewable energy sector. We've been able to churn out 50 students in the last 3 years. We've had 3 batches of training already, with already about 75 students passing through the training institute. And this last batch is the one that has really brought about what we call gender equality. Because in the past years, we've not had females keen into this training institute. But this last year, we've had about 3 females already. In the present batch of training we are undergoing, we have 1 female.
To everybody that is looking at me right now, even to the women out there and the ladies, I happen to be a married woman with 2 children, and I'm coming all the way from the comfort of my home to come and learn this. And I've come to realize that even me can do it better than these men out there. So that is the reason why I've come to acquire this basic knowledge to be a solution provider.
Ifeoluwa, the only female trainee technician in the current batch of training at White Consult Training Institute, is breaking barriers and stereotypes about women's involvement in getting the needed skills and expertise to make an impact in this sector.
So when we look at this power problem, we find out that most kids that are coming back from school, some of them happen to come back late at night, and at this time of the night there is no power supply. They end up using local lights like lantern, candles, and which is not good enough for their study. They need a well illuminated environment to be able to study and get a better result.
It is important to note that the components of these solar inverters are reusable and recyclable, making it safer and cleaner to be used in our homes, schools, hospitals, and offices.
Every product which the human consume must complete a life cycle. If we keep manufacturing products and these products are not recyclable, we would end up creating another form of pollution while we are solving one. As such, if you look at the solar panels, if you look at the batteries, they are all recyclable products. Of recent, the Lagos State government has also partnered with us in ways whereby we can recycle this product. They have a dump site where we take these bad products, or these products when they have expired their shelf life, they have a way of extracting different components from this product.
Adebola's efforts in his community and Nigeria at large has not been unrecognized. He has partnered with both local and state governments and most recently banks to offer installment payment options to customers to procure solar inverters, and he has received awards for his contributions to the society. Adebola's contribution will not just create employment and alternative sources of power supply for Nigerians, but ensure our society is a safer place to live in with his environmental-friendly solutions. This indeed is a call for action on more pragmatic solutions and training that could drastically alleviate the unemployment and power challenges prevalent in Nigeria.
Well, that's it for today. Business Africa is over. I'll see you next week, same time, same channel for Initiative Africa. We'll host Mosadek Bali, founder and CEO of Azalai Hotel Group. In the meantime, you can watch this show on our website, africana.com, and follow us on all our social media channels. Feel free to share, like, and comment using the hashtag Business Africa. Have a great week, and until next time, goodbye.